Greetings and bienvenue, Midnight Crew. Thank you for returning to this broadcast, and welcome to new viewers joining us for the first time. If you like a video, then feel free to subscribe.
Do you guys want to talk about creepy old people and their various creepy and/or strange behaviors? If you do, I have quite a few of them about my grandmother who has dementia. I had to move in with her recently because her husband died and she can't care for herself. She sees people in the house almost constantly. She talks to them as if they were real. She worries about them when she doesn't see them. She can't separate dreams from reality either. I'll proceed with a few accounts in the following posts. Back when she first started having hallucinations, her husband was still alive. My parents were convinced that the house was haunted because they didn't realize she was exhibiting features of Alzheimer's dementia, which can cause extremely vivid dreams and hallucinations. Take it as you will. I know this is /x/, and many of you are die-hard believers in ghosts, so if you want to believe this is a problem with ghosts, you're welcome to it. While I was living an hour away, I was only told stories. My mom told me that one night my grandma had gotten out of bed in the middle of the night and saw a man standing at the end of the hallway holding a flashlight. He was waving it up and down, pointing it at her. She ran back into the bedroom to get my grandpa to run the man out of the house, but he was gone by the time he looked. They called the police and had them search the property, but no man was ever found. A similar account to the previous occurred one night when my grandma had gotten out of bed at night because she heard something in the hallway. She saw a man repairing a lamp in the hallway. She said he had it all taken apart and said he was trying to fix it so she could see in the dark. She freaked out and got my grandpa, but this time no cops were called. My grandma complained a lot about seeing people looking at her through any of the windows in the house. She told my mom that there was a scary old man who would look at her through her bathroom window when she was taking a bath. She doesn't like taking baths now because she gets scared. When I had to move in with her, one of the first encounters that I had with her ghosts was when she frantically told me that she could see a dead man laying outside in the yard. She was so worried that she would get in trouble because he was hurt on her property. Of course, when I went out to look, there was no dead man laying outside. My mom told me that my grandma had told her about seeing a woman with very long, stringy black hair and a flowing white dress hovering over her bed one night. My family were sure that it was my stepdad's mother's ghost because she fit the description. I'm far more skeptical. On a different occasion, Grandma was said to have seen a man resembling Marilyn Manson standing in her bedroom, only he was wearing what she described as a giant sock from his feet to his chest. Don't ask. I have no idea why. Grandma was said to have seen a toddler on a tricycle riding up and down the hallway, giggling and having a good time. No one else could see the child. Many times, Mom would tell me that Grandma would see people cooking in her kitchen. She would see an entire family of people gathering around like it was a holiday, cooking a big meal for 4 or 5, hard to remember people. The only thing strange about that is that my grandfather said he saw a woman taking a glass into the kitchen that same day, and he was not known to hallucinate. Take it as you will. The incident that prompted me to move in was more scary for our family than it was for Grandma. My uncle was supposed to be staying the night with her while my grandpa was dying in the hospital, but he slipped off after she went to bed so he could spend some time with his girlfriend. Around 1 a.m., Grandma got out of bed, got her walker, and left the house in pursuit of a group of people who she claimed were leading her to church. In reality, there were no people, and she was walking out of her yard through my mom's yard and into the neighbor's driveway. She wasn't wearing a coat, and it was below freezing, and she's 85 years old and 4'11" tall. Not good. Luckily, one of the people that lived over there had worked late and was coming home when they found her tangled in a briar bush. My mom had to get her and take her home, then chew out my uncle for not being there to watch her. When I moved in, it was very difficult to deal with her. She would wake up in the middle of the night after dreaming of being 30 years old again and not knowing where she was, demanding to go home. I would have to drive her around the block and back to the house to reset her. It's very common to have to tell her that the people she constantly sees through the windows looking at her and getting into her stuff aren't real. Sometimes she seems to get it, but most of the time she believes what she sees before she believes me. Just the other day I woke up and was making coffee when she approached me and asked me why there was a little girl walking up and down a thin cable connected to 2 trees in the backyard, and that the neighbors were watching her from their yard. I looked out there and saw no little girl as usual, just a white plastic bag that was very vaguely in the shape of a little girl in a dress. She was worried sick that the little girl who was walking up and down the cable was going to fall and get hurt. I tried to explain to her that it's just a bag and not a real girl, but she wasn't having any of my nonsense. My mom came to take her to the grocery store, so I took that opportunity to cut the bag down. The next day she asked me whatever happened to the little girl. I just gave up and told her that her mother came and whipped her for being in someone's yard without asking. She seemed satisfied with that answer. A few weeks ago, she had a dream that my mom, who is 55, was suddenly 6 years old again, and she was freaking out because my mom was missing. I told her she had been dreaming and that her daughter was 55 and that she was 85, and therefore her daughter could not be 6 years old. Again, she wasn't buying my bullshit story and was very upset that I was so unconcerned about her missing child. I called my mom to come up there and show herself, but since she didn't look 6 years old, she didn't know who my mom was. So for 2 whole days, my grandma begged me to help her find her 6-year-old daughter, who had been missing all night. I think the scariest thing about these accounts is the fear of losing your mind. Living in this situation with her makes me dread old age. I'm terrified that I'll become demential like this. The worst part is that aside from staying healthy and visit a doctor regularly, there isn't much that can be done to prevent it, and nothing prevents you from getting old except dying young. So /x/ I'll stop here. Got anything for me? I'll write more if I can remember more.
Not OP, but my neighbor has dementia. I think he's harmless, but says a lot of weird shit. He's in his late 60s, always sees men in trees watching him, sees men across the road outside, just watching his house, sees people sleeping in other people's driveways, hears men yelling at him, telling him they want to kill him at night outside of his house. Very forgetful. Probably has Alzheimer's, but that's what I just self-diagnosed. His wife says he sometimes realizes he's hallucinating, but other times thinks it's real.
So does she always recognize you? Say she wakes up one morning and you're in the kitchen cooking breakfast. What is her reaction? Also, does she pretend to know who you are?
She doesn't recognize me very often. You hit the nail on the head, she pretends to know me. If I ask her, I seem to have forgotten my name, can you please remind me? And she'll just say, I know who you are, and smile that confused smile that always gives people away when they claim to understand something that they clearly do not. Most mornings she seems glad that someone is in the house. Whether it were me or Obama, I'm not sure if there would be a difference. She hallucinates random people most of the time anyway. I could just be one of her many visitors.
I've personally never met anybody with dementia, but it must be scary for the both of you. How do you cope with it?
I actually don't cope with it that well, to be honest. She is absolutely impossible to please. I'm always doing something bad to her, like inviting her to family cookouts, helping her shop, shooing invisible people out of the house, or administering her medications. Somehow, in her perspective, all of that is wrong, and I shouldn't do that, even though she asked me to do it and needs me to help her. Her brain has been eaten away by the disease so badly that she can't apply logic to anything. She projects her mourning of her husband onto anything, good or bad. I want to hire a professional sitter to stay with her, but my mom isn't a fan of that idea and keeps avoiding it. It's something I do for her because she was there for me when I was little, but by no means is it not a burden. OP once again with another creepy one. How I forgot this one is beyond me because it was very unsettling. I woke up pretty late one morning and was getting ready to start a pot of coffee. See a trend? I'm addicted. When I noticed my grandma was in the living room on the couch reading out loud from a book. I thought that it was nice that she was able to read. She had her TV on, and it was some dude detailing his experience in hell. He was explaining what it was like to be in hell, what it looked like, who he saw there, the agony and horror he witnessed, all that mess that I honestly don't believe in. So as my coffee maker began to drip, The electricity went out all over the house, and apparently all over the county. So then all I could hear was Grandma reading her book. I couldn't understand what she was saying, though. I decided to just go feed my cats, which involves walking through the living room to the sunroom where my cats live. I took a closer look at what she was reading, only to discover it wasn't a book. It was a photo album with really old photos. She wasn't reading. She was talking to the people in the pictures. I then proceeded to nope as hard as I could possibly nope, and fed and pet my kitties until the power came back on. So much nope.
Want to know something scary? Those people in the photo she was talking to, their mouths were probably moving, their eyes looking. They probably came alive to her. My cousin had similar hallucinatory experiences when paintings were moving for him and people in photos were talking to him. Did she ever say what they were saying?
That's a lot of what caused me to nope forever. I could just imagine each photo being like a small TV screen with people talking to her. It's so bizarre. I never thought to ask her what they were talking about. What was up with your cousin, if you don't mind my asking?
Hey, OP. He was sick and having a particularly high fever, like 102 Fahrenheit or so, if I remember correctly. He was also feeling pretty shit and was home alone and navigating through the hallways of his house. A painting on an old ship he had was moving, for example, and he had quite a few pictures and portraits and whatnot, and I guess they would all speak to him as he passed by. It was a very unnerving experience, but he knew he was hallucinating.
These stories make me wonder if this is how a baby sees the world. Everything and everybody is new. Simple things are complex. The human mind is incredible.
Oh, that reminds me of something else. One night not long ago, she was up unusually late. It was like 1 a.m. I went in to see why she hadn't gone to bed yet, and she said, "Because I'm waiting for them." I thought that was fairly eerie, so I asked her who they were. She said she didn't know, but there was a little girl asleep over in there, which was confusing because she was pointing at the wall. I asked her to touch the little girl to show me where she is, but she wouldn't do it. She would only point. She got closer and started pointing at a flower in a vase, so I picked it up and told her that it wasn't a little girl, that it was a flower. That totally blew her mind that I could pick up a girl and turn her into a flower. So I told her that the flower doesn't care if she goes to bed or not, so she started to get ready for bed. Not 5 minutes later, she comes back out scared, telling me there was a little boy in her bathtub peeping at her getting undressed. Now, what little boy wants to peep in on an 85-year-old woman is beyond me. Anyway, I had to show her there was no little boy in her tub by turning the light on in her bathroom. When I turned the light back off, she looked back in and said, "There's a duck. It's pecking at something." And I just started rolling on the damn floor laughing, which she didn't appreciate. I told her to stop peeping in on the duck and go to bed. She did, and that was it for the night.
Nurse here to provide some helpful tips. Looked after a lot of people with dementia. Also nursed my own grandma with dementia. 1. You guys sound like you need a break. I know you don't want to put Granny in a home, but what about respite care? It will give you time to relax, and the doctors and nurses there can review her meds and provide you with any home help if needed, such as 2. Continence aids. She sounds very far along. Is she continent? You know, if she is frequently having wet pants, it is going to degrade her skin, causing painful sores, and she's going to get a UTI, and most likely delirium. How's she eating? Coughing at all? My grandma choked to death because she literally forgot how to eat. Has she had a speech assessment done? 3. If she worries about her 6-year-old, i.e. your mom, don't tell her she's confused. She's going to be more agitated. Redirect her. Say her 6-year-old is sleeping over a friend's house or at camp, and she's perfectly safe. She will forget about it after a while. 4. Watch her. In her state, she may do things such as leave the gas on, light a fire, go off wandering, attempt to drive the car, burn herself accidentally. 5. She's your grandma. Give her some dignity. Don't tell stories on the net, man, making her out to be a fool. She might have dementia, but she has feelings.
Cool thread, OP. I was sitting with my great-grandmother last summer a few days after she had a really bad stroke. The idea was that although she was pretty paralyzed, her brain may still have functioned fully. So I would sit and talk with her and tell her I loved her and mention things about my childhood. I would sit next to her on the couch and she was forced to sort of lay back with her head in this awful position. I dozed off one afternoon, and when I woke up, she had moved slightly closer to me and her eyes were wide open and staring at me. Her face was shaking and her mouth was forever stuck in a terrible grimace. I was startled to begin with. I hadn't meant to fall asleep in the first place. She stared at me and then slowly directed her eyes to some strange point directly behind me, all the while her face shaking and her grimacing mouth twitching. She gave off this feeling of absolute terror. I had this incredibly vivid image of her staring at her own hanging body behind me. I can't explain why, and this story isn't very good, but it seriously freaked me out. Being alone with her, and then sensing some other presence in the room was a bit much. She went to hospice a few days later and died there, and her face stayed in that terrible grimace. Her funeral was an open casket funeral, and it looked like they had tried to super glue her mouth into a normal shape, and it was horrifying.
My first experience of working in a dementia ward was when I was 16 on school work placement. On my first day, the nurses said I should chat with the old folks, so I sat down in the lounge and tried to start a conversation with one old dear. She stared at me but would answer my questions, then she started to get up. She turned to me and said, "When you look into a mirror, do you see your reflection?" And she hobbled away. We'd visit my great-gran when I was little and she was still alive. She was getting senile, but my family were reluctant to have her live in a care home. She'd be found walking the streets or climbing out a 3-story window near the end. When I'd visit in the later days, she'd take a tight hold of my hand and look at me laughing and then stop and get tearful and say, "Kill me, just kill me," then start laughing again. I was about 11 and it was awful. Another time I was staying at my grand on a Friday night. I was 11 or 12 and the phone rings. I answer and it's my great-grand screaming and crying saying, "They're trying to get me, help me." What was even more freaky were that there were noises in the background like someone moving about quickly in the room. My great-grand's best friend was a psychic. She had a cocked eye and was terrified of her, though in truth she was a lovely woman. My mom said when she was 18 and only just had started dating my father, she asked this old lady to tell her future. The old lady said my dad was very near but very, very far away and he was swaying. Well, my dad lived just across the street to where my mom was being told her future, but at the very time he was on a ship out near Australia, being a sailor. She predicted my mom would miscarry twins, but have 2 sons and a bunch of other stuff I forget. My great-gran had prophetic dreams. She dreamed about the first gray horse to win the Grand National and made a lot of money on that bet. She dreamed about an accident her granddaughter would have and lots of other things. She was born in the late 1800s, and she just took being psychic and having dreams as normal things as that generation did.
My sister has worked in nursing homes since she was legally able to work. I guess she has kind of an unspoken love for caring for the elderly, which I'm happy about because there are a lot of corrupt workers in nursing homes. I've heard of many different co-workers of hers being fired and facing legal troubles for abusing the residents and for stealing medications and things like that. Unfortunately, I can't remember any stories in depth that my sister has told me from working with the elderly and those with dementia in particular, but I do remember bits and pieces. I think something I'll never forget is how they often report seeing their dead relatives days or weeks before they die. One story in particular was a lady who was on hospice. That's the terminology they use, and my sister told me it basically means they're expected to die very soon. Would often stare up at the ceiling and smile. My sister would ask her what she's smiling at, and she'd say, "My mother, she's up there." The woman being as elderly as she was, her mother obviously was no longer alive. Another resident shortly before death was pointing to the top of a tall cabinet and saying she could see her sister, who had been dead for some time. And this seems pretty common from what my sister tells me. I don't know if it has something to do with that theory about DMT being released before death, but not all of the residents who had these visions had dementia, if I recall correctly. My mom has also worked in several nursing homes years ago and recalled witnessing the same thing. The residents who do have dementia, though, make for all kinds of interesting stories, which can be shamefully funny at times. The most recent story my sister told me was how a resident was pissed off at her and was telling her that my sister was now written out of her will, which she was never in her will to begin with. She's simply a caretaker and is not related to this resident in any way. The same resident used to think my sister was somebody who used to bully her at school and would tell her that she's going to have her picture in the paper so they would all know about her bullying. Oftentimes, residents will come out of their rooms at odd hours of the night. Sister works graveyard shift, dressed oddly. I think recently a man had a diaper on his head and some sort of garment wrapped sloppily around him, saying he was ready to go to work. Oh, and there is one in particular who attacks my sister. She always comes home with bruises and scratches from this woman. A lot of them are pretty rude towards her at times and apparently hostile. My sister also said that the dementia patients seem to act up more when there is a full moon. I'm not sure if there's any real link to that, or if it's superstition, but somebody else I know who works on an entire floor dedicated to dementia patients reports the same thing.
Back when I was a kid, 8 or 9, I would go to work with my mother at a nursing home and volunteer for activities and other such small things that were legal for a child to do. After a while, it was just painful to do because I would get close to the patients and they would die. I specifically remember this one woman. She would scoot around in her wheelchair, hunched over, and mumble to herself. After a year or so of her being there, she started to carry around an old baby doll. I don't know why, maybe to clean it. But one day a nurse tried to take it from her. She started shrieking about her baby being taken and lunged forward from her wheelchair and knocked the nurse down. She started biting into her arm and actually ripped some skin off. I'm sure it has something to do with a disease or just some psychosis, but it was terrifying to see as a child.
I work in a dementia ward. I think the baby dolls are a way of comforting. There is one resident that always carries one along with her and treats it like her own child. Have I seen weird, strange things? Not really. Some residents attack you and say very profane things to you, but they do not know what they are doing. A lot of them were normal before they developed the disease. Some of the residents will wheel themselves around at night. I'll talk with them and just go along with their strange stories. There is one resident in particular that has a tendency to have a BM, bowel movement, and proceeds to paint her walls with it and her face, which to anyone would be very disgusting, but she really has no clue what she is doing. Oh, and a different resident who is pretty gone, from dementia, will bite you and tear your skin whenever you're helping with daily living necessities. I don't know what she is seeing through her eyes, but she also will talk with me a lot and tell me that her foot is burned and needs to be amputated, its normal foot, and will massage my hand thinking it is a cat or something. She's really a sweet woman. She traveled the world flying planes with her husband, who is also in our facility, but is just a normal guy. He just wants to be with his wife. So many of my coworkers do not even want to touch her because of the biting, but I guess they do not understand what dementia can do like they are supposed to. When she scratches me doing activities of daily living, I just keep calm, and she doesn't proceed to continue. It's a very sad sight seeing these people, but it is very rewarding knowing you are helping them.
I work full-time in a dementia unit in southern England. Never experienced anything mega creepy. Most of our residents just have quirks, and they're happy most of the time. Their mood can change in just a second, though, and they can attack you, throw things at you, whatever. Some of our ladies like taking their clothes off in the corridors. One of the men likes to get naked too, but he knows exactly what he's doing and just prefers to sit in the lounge with just his pad on, what we have to call adult nappies in a care home. For a couple of residents, I've read up on their care plans and found that one of the residents was assaulted when she was younger. So whenever we go to wash and dress her, she always screams for her dad and that we're killing her. And another lady always puts some scraps of food on the floor for her dog because she always did that before she got the disease. When the food doesn't disappear, she yells at the dog for being ungrateful, or she just sits there and strokes thin air with a cup of tea. It's endearing in a way. Some ask if the vegetables are ready, some ask if the kids are okay, some ask when the buses are running. But, like I said, never experienced anything very odd, but it's really interesting to read a thread like this.
I provide tech support for a nursing home. One patient grabbed onto my hand while I was walking past and asked me where the bathroom was, then kept babbling word salad at me, and I felt helpless to do anything because I didn't want to get reported for touching one of the patients. That same day, another patient had seen my car parked out the front and thought it was her daughter's car, and I had stolen it. Eventually, I ended up parking it around the corner because she wouldn't leave the receptionist alone. Another time I was leaving the server room, and an old lady gently grabbed my hip and told me to please slow down, but then wouldn't let go, and she didn't say anything else, so I kept walking until I was out of her grip. When my grandfather was in the hospital, in his final days, he turned to me and called me Amelia, then turned to my sister and also called her Amelia. He couldn't recognize anyone, and it was heartbreaking.
I don't have scary stories, just sad, unnerving ones. My grandpa had to go in a nursing home in the last year of his life due to a massive stroke. He lived in Iowa, as do most of my family, but my immediate family lives in Texas. We visited for Christmas, spring break, and then summer until he passed away at the end of October in 2008. It was super depressing seeing him there, and he was depressed being there and not being able to do anything. He still had his mind, just couldn't talk, walk, or eat and drink. Everything had to be thickened, almost like jelly, even the water, properly. There were a couple of old ladies that were kind of creepy, but that's not fair to say, since they really couldn't help it. One always had this weird smile on her face and was always wandering around and tried to escape. Ha! When we were there, we'd always hear the door alarm go off and the workers say, "Ugh, Glenda's trying to leave again." She ate at the same table my grandpa did, and also always tried to hang all over me, poke me, and giggle. I would move and she'd follow me. The other lady always looked like she was distressed and constantly mumbled and drooled. Another issue she had was getting up in the middle of the night and going into random people's room. Just standing there, staring, mumbling, and drooling. My grandpa said she scared him. I know these don't concern anything paranormal, so sorry to disappoint. Just felt like adding. I do not like nursing homes.
This isn't really a story, but I am terrified of convalescent homes in a way that goes beyond the observable. I just won't go in them because of how they make me feel. I've been in morgues before, but old folks' homes take the cake when it comes to giving off the worst vibes of hopelessness, desperation, and death. I literally feel like I have life-hungry eyes watching me at every turn, as if all the old people want to take my soul and youth from me like vampires. Misery cloaks those places and I just can't go into them.
Oh my goodness, yes. My grandparents are still in one, and while it's not particularly upsetting to visit them there, it's just so depressing thinking that these people have lived for probably 70 to 100 years and are just being condescended to like children, just waiting to die. My grandpa is the one with dementia, and he absolutely can't stand it there. He complains every single time that he just wants to get out. My grandmother, though, is a bit better and has accepted it. She has some friends and participates in some activities, but still, it makes me sad all the same.
Hospices are worse. With old folks' homes, there's occasional upbeat people. At hospices, everyone is emotionally fucked up about dying or crazy.
It was really creepy or weird, but I felt so much on edge. Summer about 10 years ago. Old woman standing at her gate. Lots of people walking past her. Glances at them, but then spots me. Starts watching me as I approach her. Don't look at her as I walk past. Grabs my arm. "Excuse me, could you come inside and put my radio on?" Looks like Pennywise when he's the old woman. Yeah, sure. It was a pretty hot day with it being summer, but her living room was totally hot, like a dry heat, and actually made me itch. Room stinks and the heat doesn't make it smell better. Liter whiskey bottles with about a quarter in strewn everywhere. See the radio on the floor and bend down to switch it on. Press the on button and nothing happens. She picks something up and stands directly behind me. Start panicking like in case she's a mental case and stoves my head in, and the radio thing is just a ruse to get me inside. Notice it isn't plugged in. Plug it in and it comes on. Stand up still, noping, and turn around to face her. There you go. It wasn't plugged in. Stares at me. Drops something on the ground. I assume whatever it was she picked up. Grabs me in an embrace. Starts crying, thanking me and saying she has no one. Tries to give me money for helping her. Refuse because I basically haven't done anything. Relieved still when I get outside. Walk past at night and can see she has a lamp on. Lamp is on for about a week. Find out she died. Every time I think of it, I feel guilty and I don't know why.
That was good of you, Anon. So many old people are just alone. Kids grow up, move out, live their own lives, and parents and grandparents are forgotten about. I worked in a grocery store when I was younger, and we had a few old people who came in not to shop so much as to have someone to talk to. The half hour they spent in the store was likely the only human contact they would have that week. I would talk to them as long as they liked. I always loved their stories, and many led far more interesting lives than me. One little old guy, nicest little old man one could meet, turned out he was a decorated tail gunner in World War II. He had bailed out of his plane over the ocean and was barely picked up in time. Here was this little, frail old man who could have kicked my ass just by looking at me wrong when he was younger, if he had wanted.
Thanks, Anon. I like to help when I can, but because I look like a thug, the opportunity is very rare. For example, me and a friend were in town, and an old woman fell over the curb, and we were the only ones who went across to help her up. And what happened? Someone tried to claim we were stealing her bag. Someone who looked more respectable helped her up, and he got a load of plaudits. Multiple times I've helped old people across the road or carried things home for them. Don't get me wrong, a lot of them are dubious in case I have some other motive. I always think of it as if it was one of my grandparents, and how thankful they would be if someone helped them. I too worked in a shop a few years back, and a lot of old people came in when it was quiet and would buy like one item, stand talking until someone came in, then go really quiet and leave instantly, only to return a little while later and buy one item. I used to think to myself, why not just buy everything at once to save you from coming backwards and forwards? Then I realized why they didn't. I remember one was an old boxer, still big build and looked like a total mean cunt. He forced me to write his phone number down in case there was ever any trouble. I wasn't from the area, and people are well known to try and take the piss. I told him it would be fine, but he insisted I write it down, and I didn't try to tell him otherwise a second time. Definitely one of the most intimidating people I've ever met, and he was at least 65 or 70.
When I was a very young child, I went to see my grandmother in the nursing home, and as I was walking up and down the hallways while my father talked to my grandmother, his mother, one of the old women who lived there came out of her room and asked me to turn on her air conditioner. It went exactly like you described turning on the radio in your story. She stood behind me. I became afraid she was going to bash in my head, and then I discovered that I just had to flip a switch and I managed to turn on the air conditioner. She was extremely grateful and tried to give me money, and she died later that week. I feel guilty too, and I don't know why.
I've never had a thread last this long before. I remember another account. When I first moved in, one night Grandma was standing at the window looking at something. I asked her what she was looking at since she seemed a little worried. She said, "Do you see that sparkle right there?" I just agreed with her because it was raining and I guessed she was just seeing glints of light. She continued, "Well, there are 3 sparkles out there. The biggest one has a house up there." She pointed up the mountain. I was very confused.
I had a grandma with severe dementia. Can't remember the name, but it wasn't Alzheimer's. She used to be awesome and nicer to me than my parents. She had traveled the world and taught me Spanish, and her house was full of ancient, priceless artifacts. She lived a 6-hour car ride away in Wisconsin, so we didn't see her that often. She had divorced my grandpa decades ago and lived alone. There were signs she needed help to live on her own. She hired a housekeeper who helped her and was amazing for a year or 2. Then we stopped visiting her. She lost her mind. She signed the power of attorney to her housekeeper and her boyfriend. They stole all her money. She became addicted to oxycodone and benzos. The housekeeper ruined her financially and she lost her house. My dad went to court to prove she had dementia, backed by many doctors to save her from the housekeeper. He lost the case, that's America judicial system for you, and paid tens of thousands of dollars for attorneys, hundreds of hours off work, and he became depressed for years. I don't know if my grandma is still alive. I doubt it. If she is, she's probably homeless. My family is not allowed to have any contact with her. I have tried every possible angle to learn the housekeeper's name, even broken into my dad's office, called the attorneys, to no avail. I will learn the name and I will find her, and I will make sure she ends up where she deserves after a few years of Saw-style fun. That's a real dementia story.
I hope that you enjoyed tonight's broadcast. If you enjoyed tonight's story, then please subscribe to the channel, as more Greentext will appear daily. A new broadcast will appear when the clock strikes midnight Central Time.
Remember to check the Odyssey and Rumble pages for separate archives of previous broadcasts.